What if the most valuable asset in the world wasn't a stock, a company, or a skyscraper, but a person everyone else saw as invisible? What if the key to unlocking a billion-dollar empire was hidden behind a worn-out apron in a forgotten diner, held by a woman who thought her greatest ambition was making it to the end of a double shift? This is the story of how a simple question changed everything, and how the answer revealed a truth more powerful than money. It's a story about seeing the unseen, and it might just make you wonder who you've been overlooking in your own life. Elara traced the condensation on a water glass, her finger gliding over the cool surface, a small, mindless act of rebellion against the relentless heat of the kitchen and the simmering anxiety in her chest. The diner buzzed with the lunchtime rush, a chaotic symphony of clattering plates, sizzling oil, and shouted orders. To the patrons, she was a blur of motion, a pair of hands delivering coffee, a polite but forgettable smile. She was part of the scenery, as unremarkable as the faded vinyl on the booth seats. But beneath the practiced calm, Elara's mind was a whirlwind. A stack of final notice bills sat on her small kitchen table at home, monuments to her father's long illness and the medical system that had devoured their savings and then their hope. Her shoes, hidden beneath the hem of her uniform, had a hole in the sole, a private, damp reminder of how close she was to the edge with every step she took. She moved with an efficiency born of desperation, her memory a fortress where she stored every order, every preference, every face. Table 4 needed a refill on decaf, Table 7's son had a nut allergy, Table 2 was celebrating an anniversary. These details were her currency, the tiny acts of competence that kept her employed. She didn't know that today, her most valuable asset wasn't her service, but the hidden library of knowledge she carried in her mind, a legacy from the father she had lost, a man who had taught her that language was the key to understanding not just words, but the very patterns of the world. And she certainly didn't know that the man who had just walked in, casting a long, sharp shadow in the doorway, was about to ask her to unlock it all. Julian Thorne did not belong here. He was a creature of glass towers and silent, chauffeur-driven cars, a man whose tailored suit cost more than Elara made in a year. He moved with a chilling stillness, his gaze sweeping across the greasy spoon with the dispassionate air of a predator surveying unfamiliar territory. His companion, a man with the weary, cautious eyes of a corporate lawyer, looked deeply uncomfortable. This was Arthur, Julian's right hand, and his expression screamed one question: what are we doing here? Julian ignored him, his attention fixed, his purpose a secret held tight in his chest. He wasn't here for the coffee, which he suspected was burnt, or the food, which he knew was fried. He was here on a desperate, unconventional hunt. His multi-billion-dollar empire, Thorne Industries, was on the brink of a catastrophic collapse, brought on by a corporate betrayal that had left him vulnerable. The key to his survival was hidden in a series of encrypted communications from a rival, messages that his best analysts, his most expensive consultants, couldn't crack. They were looking at the code, at the numbers. Julian had a gut feeling they were looking at the wrong thing. He believed the answer was in the language, in the subtle, human fingerprints left behind. So he had started this bizarre pilgrimage, visiting places where real people lived and spoke, listening, searching for a spark of something extraordinary in the ordinary. He'd almost given up. And then he saw her. The waitress. There was a quiet intelligence in her eyes, a precision in her movements that seemed out of place. He watched her for a moment, then made a decision. He would set one final, impossible trap. He would ask one more absurd question. He motioned for her to approach, his face an unreadable mask of cold authority. Elara's stomach tightened. Men like him usually meant trouble. She smoothed her apron, took a deep breath, and walked toward the table, completely unaware that she was walking toward her own destiny. He ordered in flawless, rapid-fire Mandarin, a complex meal with several specific, contradictory modifications, while Arthur looked on, bewildered. Elara didn't flinch. She simply listened, her head tilted slightly. When he was done, she replied in the same dialect, her tone respectful but firm. Sir, if you have the fish steamed that way, the sauce you requested for the noodles will clash with the ginger. Might I suggest a light soy reduction instead? It is more traditional for the Hunan style you've described. Silence. Arthur's jaw hung open. Julian's eyes, for the first time, showed a flicker of something other than ice. He had expected her to be confused, to call for a manager. He had not expected a nuanced culinary and linguistic correction. His test had just become very, very real. He leaned forward, the casual diner ambience melting away, the space around their table becoming a pocket of intense silence. "You speak Mandarin," he stated, his voice a low hum. "My father was a professor of East Asian linguistics," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "He taught me." Julian's gaze sharpened. This was it. The spark. "Tell me, then," he said, his voice dropping even lower, drawing her into his orbit. "In the northernmost province of Tajikistan, there is a small, isolated community that speaks a rare variant of the Yagnobi language. It has a unique grammatical structure where the past tense is implied by the resonance of the vowel that follows the verb. It is a dying tongue, spoken by fewer than 200 people. What is the word for betrayal?" Elara froze. The diner, the orders, the bills, it all faded away. There was only the question, hanging in the air. It was an impossible query, an academic trap of the highest order. It wasn't a test of fluency, it was a test of deep, systemic understanding. A memory surfaced, a dusty book her father had cherished, a late-night conversation about linguistic ghosts. Her mind raced, sifting through forgotten lessons, connecting patterns, sounds, and meanings. The word wasn't a word. It was a concept, a phrase built on a metaphor. She looked him directly in the eye, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the diner's noise. "There is no single word for it," she began, and Arthur started to sigh in disappointment. But she wasn't finished. "The concept is expressed as the shadow that eats the root. It describes a treachery that comes from within your own garden, something you trusted to be part of you, which then consumes you from the ground up." Her explanation was precise, poetic, and devastatingly accurate. She saw the shock register on Julian's face, a genuine, unguarded crack in the frozen mask. He wasn't just surprised, he was thunderstruck. He had found it. The mind he was looking for, the unique perspective that didn't just see the code but understood the soul behind it. He had thrown out the most obscure, difficult linguistic challenge he could conjure, and a waitress in a cheap diner had not only answered it but had explained the very heart of the metaphor, a metaphor that perfectly described his current crisis. Betrayal. The shadow that eats the root. Arthur was staring at Elara as if she had just sprouted wings. He had seen Julian Thorne intimidate world leaders and dismantle corporate giants, but he had never, ever seen him rendered speechless. Julian leaned back, the tension leaving his shoulders. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, a rare sight that transformed his severe features. "I have a problem, Elara," he said, his tone shifting from inquisitor to conspirator. "It involves patterns, language, and a shadow eating the root of my company. My team of experts is blind. I believe you can see what they can't. I want you to come work for me." Starting immediately, Elara blinked, certain she was mishearing him. "Work for you? Doing what? Waiting tables?" A dry chuckle escaped Julian's lips. "No. As a special consultant. I will pay you $1 million for your time." The clatter of a fork dropping from a nearby table was the only sound. Elara's world tilted on its axis. $1 million. It was an absurd, impossible number, a fantasy. It was the answer to every prayer she was too tired to even whisper anymore. It was freedom from the debt, a future for her family, a way out of the hole in her shoe and the hole in her life. "You're serious?" she breathed, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. "I have never been more serious about anything in my life," Julian replied, his eyes locked on hers, his expression conveying a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He saw her, not as a waitress, but as the key. And for the first time in a very long time, Elara felt something she thought she had lost forever: hope. The transition was dizzying, a violent collision of two worlds. One moment, Elara was unscrewing the salt shakers for their nightly refill, the smell of grease clinging to her clothes. The next, she was stepping out of a silent, gleaming elevator into the penthouse floor of Thorn Tower. The city sprawled below her, a glittering tapestry of lights seen through a wall of seamless glass. Her cramped, third-floor walk-up with its flickering hallway bulb and view of a brick wall felt like a distant, hazy dream. Julian's world was one of cool marble, hushed tones, and the subtle scent of expensive leather. He had given her a simple instruction. Be ready in the morning. A black car had arrived, followed by a personal shopper who had swiftly and politely replaced Elara's worn-out wardrobe with racks of elegant, understated clothing made of fabrics she had never felt before. She felt like an actress in a play for which she had never learned the lines. Standing in the heart of Julian's corporate kingdom, she clutched the strap of her new leather bag, a stranger in a foreign land. The first person she met was Marcus Vance. He was the executive vice president, a man whose ambition was as sharply tailored as his suit. He had the predatory smile of a shark and eyes that assessed her with undisguised contempt. When Julian introduced her as his new special consultant, Marcus's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. "A consultant?" he repeated, the word dripping with skepticism. "On what, precisely? The cafeteria menu?" The jab was meant to sting, to remind her of her place. Julian's voice cut through the tension, sharp as broken glass. "Elara has a unique perspective we have been sorely lacking, Marcus. She will be assisting on the Kaido merger." At the mention of Kaido, Marcus's condescending demeanor faltered. The Kaido deal was the source of all their problems. It was a massive international merger with a Japanese tech giant that was imploding. Communications from their counterparts had become erratic, filled with what seemed like nonsense, veiled threats, and impossible demands. It was this breakdown that was threatening to sink Thorn Industries. "She will be reporting directly to me," Julian finished, his tone leaving no room for argument. Marcus gave Elara a final, dismissive look. "Of course. Welcome aboard." It was a declaration of war. He saw her as a temporary amusement, a bizarre whim of the lonely king on the top floor. He had no idea that she was the one person who could unravel the very scheme he was a part of. The weight of her new reality settled on Elara as she was shown to a sterile, empty office with the same breathtaking view. It was a gilded cage. On the desk was a single, encrypted laptop. It contained the entire Kaido correspondence. Her task, Julian had explained, was not to analyze the financials or the legal terms. It was to read between the lines, to find the pattern in the noise, to hear the whisper in the storm. She was alone, surrounded by enemies, with the fate of a billion-dollar company resting on her shoulders. The waitress was gone. A new life had begun. The boardroom was an arena, and Elara felt like the gladiator thrown to the lions. 20 executives sat around a polished mahogany table that reflected their stern, judgmental faces. They were the old guard, the architects of Julian's empire, and they all stared at her with the same mix of curiosity and disdain she had seen in Marcus Vance's eyes. Marcus, seated at the head of the table opposite Julian, was running the meeting, his voice a smooth, confident drone as he presented slides filled with incomprehensible charts and data streams. He was deliberately using the most obscure corporate jargon, weaving a web of acronyms and financial terminology designed to isolate and humiliate her. He wanted to prove to Julian, and to the entire room, that his new consultant was nothing more than a foolish indulgence. As you can see from the Q3 delta and the subsequent algorithmic drift in their response patterning, Marcus said, gesturing to a particularly dense slide, Kaido's position is untenable. Our analysts conclude it's randomized aggression. They're trying to sink the deal. Elara listened, but she wasn't looking at the slides. She was reading the raw message transcripts on her tablet, the ones that the analysts had dismissed as gibberish. They had run them through translation software, which had spit out disjointed, nonsensical phrases. But Elara wasn't translating the words, she was listening to the rhythm, the structure, the ghost of the language beneath. She saw what the software couldn't. It wasn't random. It was a dialect. A very specific, rural dialect from the Kansai region of Japan, one known for its use of double meanings and intricate, nature-based metaphors. The executives were looking for a business language. Elara was hearing poetry. Julian caught her eye, a silent question passing between them. She gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. "Excuse me, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice quiet but clear, instantly cutting through his presentation. The entire room turned to her. Marcus's smile was tight. "Yes, Ms. Rossi? Do you have a question about the EBITDA projections?" "No," she said, standing up. "I have an answer." She walked to the screen, her heart pounding but her purpose firm. "You're looking at this as a negotiation. You're wrong. This isn't a negotiation. It's a warning." She pointed to a phrase on the screen that the official translation had rendered as "the silent carp fears the fisherman's moon." Your software doesn't understand idiomatic speech. This phrase doesn't mean anything about fish. In the dialect they are using, it means our silent partner fears your leader's hidden intentions. They believe we are trying to betray them. She continued, deconstructing message after message. "The river stone is patient" didn't mean they were waiting. It meant we know the truth will eventually surface. A borrowed kimono for the festival wasn't a random image. It was a direct accusation, meaning you are presenting a false identity. She laid it all bare, revealing a coherent, terrified narrative hidden beneath the surface. They weren't being aggressive, they were scared. They believed Thorn Industries was planning a hostile takeover post-merger, orchestrated by a secret partner. The boardroom was utterly silent, the previous confidence shattered. They had been preparing for a war with an enemy who was actually trying to send a desperate SOS. Marcus Vance's face was pale, his composure finally cracking. She had done in 10 minutes what his entire department couldn't do in 3 months. She had changed the entire game. Julian Thorne watched her, a look of profound vindication on his face. He hadn't just hired a waitress. He had hired a visionary. That evening, the city lights seemed to burn a little brighter. The tension of the boardroom had been replaced by a quiet, contemplative atmosphere in Julian's penthouse office. He had dismissed everyone else, wanting to speak with Elara alone. He stood by the massive window, a silhouette against the skyline, holding a glass of what she assumed was very expensive whiskey. He hadn't said a word for several minutes, simply watching the river of headlights flowing through the canyons of the city. Elara waited, feeling the unfamiliar softness of the Italian leather chair beneath her. She had won the battle in the boardroom, but she still felt the unease of an outsider. "My father would have liked you," Julian said finally, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He turned from the window, his eyes holding a distant, sad light. "He built this company from nothing. He was a brilliant, ruthless man. He saw value in things no one else did. But he never saw the value in people. They were assets, tools. He taught me to see the world the same way." He took a slow sip of his drink. "The betrayal that started this crisis. It came from someone he trusted. Someone I trusted. A man who was like a second father to me. He used the trust we gave him to try and tear this all down. Your shadow that eats the root you named the poison that's been killing this company." He walked over and sat in the chair opposite her, the vast desk no longer between them. The formidable CEO was gone, replaced by a man burdened by legacy and loneliness. "Tell me about your father," he asked gently. Elara found herself opening up, the words flowing easily for the first time. She spoke of her father's passion for linguistics, how he could find joy in the history of a single word. She described his study, filled with dusty books and maps of forgotten dialects, a sanctuary of knowledge. And she spoke of the illness that had stolen his brilliant mind piece by piece, leaving her with a mountain of debt and a profound sense of loss. "He gave me this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This way of seeing the world. He said that if you truly listen, language will never lie to you. People lie. Numbers can be manipulated. But the structure of a language, its history, its soul, that tells the truth." As she spoke, Julian listened with an intensity that made her feel truly seen. He wasn't just hearing her story, he was understanding the source of her gift. It wasn't just an intellectual skill, it was born from love and loss. A connection was forming between them, fragile yet powerful. It went beyond employer and employee. It was a meeting of two lonely souls who had each, in their own way, been betrayed by the world, who had learned to build walls to protect themselves. In the quiet of the office, high above the sleeping city, those walls were beginning to come down. He recognized the integrity in her that he had found lacking in his own world. She saw the vulnerability beneath his icy exterior. The Kaido merger was the reason they were in this room, but it was no longer the most important thing happening between them. The backlash was swift and brutal. Marcus Vance, humiliated in the boardroom and terrified of Elara's growing influence, decided to strike back not with corporate maneuvering, but with public character assassination. He leaked a carefully curated story to a notorious online tabloid, one that specialized in tearing down the powerful. The headline was explosive. IC King's new queen? Thorn CO charms waitress with $1 million GIG. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation and malicious fiction. It painted Elara as a conniving opportunist, a modern-day Cinderella with loose morals who had somehow tricked the reclusive billionaire. It twisted her background, portraying her father not as a respected academic but as a failed dreamer, and her own past as a series of calculated moves to trap a wealthy man. It included an unflattering photo of her from her diner days, looking exhausted and disheveled, placed next to a glamorous paparazzi shot of Julian. The contrast was deliberate and cruel. The story spread like wildfire. It was picked up by mainstream news outlets, hungry for a sensational story about the enigmatic Julian Thorn. Suddenly, Elara was infamous. Her face was everywhere. The whispers in the hallways of Thorn Tower became overt stares. The same executives who had been stunned into silence by her brilliance now looked at her with renewed suspicion. She was no longer a prodigy, she was a punchline, a scandal. Arthur cornered Julian in his office, his face grim. "This is a disaster, Julian. The board is panicking. Our stock took a hit this morning. They see this as erratic behavior. They think you've lost your judgment. They're demanding you terminate her contract immediately. They can demand whatever they want," Julian said, his voice dangerously calm as he stared at the offending article on his screen, his knuckles white as he gripped his mouse. "Marcus is behind this." "I know he is. Knowing it and proving it are two different things," Arthur countered, his voice pleading. "This isn't just about her anymore. This is about the company. Your legacy. You're putting everything at risk for a woman you just met." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Was Arthur right? Was this a catastrophic mistake? For Elara, the public humiliation was a physical blow. She had spent her entire life trying to be invisible, to simply survive without drawing attention. Now, the entire world was not only looking at her but laughing at her. The beautiful clothes felt like a costume, the luxurious office a prison. Every skeptical glance, every whispered comment, confirmed her deepest fear: she didn't belong here. Marcus Vance had done more than attack her reputation. He had attacked her very identity, reinforcing the belief that a girl like her could never truly earn a place in a world like this. He had made her feel like a fraud all over again. The weight of the scandal was crushing. Elara walked through the pristine corridors of Thorn Tower feeling like a ghost, the whispers of her colleagues following her like a shroud. They saw the tabloid headlines, not the woman who had deciphered the Kaido code. They saw a caricature, a gold digger, an imposter. The doubt was a poison seeping into her own mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe her breakthrough in the boardroom was just a lucky guess. Maybe Julian's faith in her was a foolish whim, a billionaire's fantasy. The confidence she had begun to build crumbled, leaving behind the familiar ache of insecurity. She sat in her magnificent office, staring at the cityscape, but all she could see was the reflection of a tired waitress, playing dress-up in a world where she would never be accepted. The shame was unbearable. She couldn't face Julian. She couldn't bear to see a flicker of doubt in his eyes, to know that she had become a liability, a stain on his reputation. It was better to disappear, to return to the anonymity where she belonged. At least there, the expectations were simple: fill the coffee, clear the plates, survive another day. She made her decision. With trembling hands, she wrote a short, simple resignation note, leaving it on the polished surface of the desk. She didn't pack the expensive clothes or the designer bag. She changed back into the simple jeans and t-shirt she had arrived in, a symbolic shedding of a life that wasn't hers. She slipped out of the office, avoiding the gazes of the assistants, and took the elevator down, each floor a descent back into her old life. She walked into Julian's office without being announced, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. He was on the phone, his voice sharp and angry, clearly dealing with the fallout from the articles. He saw her, and his expression softened immediately. He ended the call. "Ilara, I've been trying to reach you. I'm leaving, Julian," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She placed her keycard on his desk. "I can't do this. Marcus was right. Everyone was right. I don't belong here. I'm sorry for the trouble I've caused you." Julian stared at her, then at the keycard. He looked not angry, but deeply wounded. "You believe them? You believe what they're writing?" "I believe that I'm a waitress who got lucky," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "And you're a billionaire who made a mistake. Let me go before I do any more damage to you." He stood up and walked around the desk, stopping just in front of her. The air crackled with unspoken emotion. This was the critical moment. He could accept her resignation, cut his losses, and save his empire from the scandal. It would be the logical, ruthless thing to do, the very thing his father would have done. The entire corporate world expected it. But as he looked at Ilara, at her genuine pain and her fierce, misplaced sense of integrity, he knew he couldn't. Losing his company would be nothing compared to losing her. "I don't make mistakes about people, Ilara," he said, his voice low and intense. "And you are the furthest thing from a mistake I have ever known. They aren't attacking you because you're weak. They're attacking you because you're powerful, and your power threatens them. Don't let them win. Don't let him win." Julian's words were a lifeline. He wasn't pushing her away. He was pulling her closer, shielding her with a faith she couldn't find in herself. He saw the flicker of hope in her eyes and seized the moment. "Arthur!" he barked into his intercom. "Call an emergency board meeting. Now. And get Marcus Vance in there." An hour later, the boardroom was once again filled with the same hostile, skeptical faces. This time, the atmosphere was even more charged, thick with accusation. Marcus Vance sat smugly, believing he had won. He had successfully painted Ilara as a liability and Julian as a fool. The board was here to do damage control, to force Julian to fire her. "I've called you here," Julian began, his voice ringing with authority, "to address the recent, baseless attacks on Ms. Rossi's character and my judgment." A board member interrupted. "Julian, with all due respect, the optics are catastrophic. The Kaido deal is fragile enough without a public circus. You must let her go." "No," Julian said flatly. The words silenced the room. "I'm not letting her go. In fact, I'm doubling down. I am so confident in Ms. Rossi's abilities that I am staking the entire Kaido merger on her final analysis. If she is wrong, I will tender my own resignation as CEO." Gasps echoed around the table. Arthur looked like he was going to faint. This was an unthinkable gamble. Marcus smirked, barely containing his glee. He was about to get everything he ever wanted. Julian turned his gaze to Ilara, who stood beside him, pale but resolute. "Ilara, you told me their messages were a warning, that they feared a betrayal from a silent partner within my own company. Do you still believe that?" "Yes," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I do. Then what are we missing?" he asked. The public pressure, the accusations of being a fraud, the doubt, it all coalesced in Ilara's mind, and suddenly, a new pattern clicked into place. The sabotage. The leak to the press. It wasn't just a personal attack. It was a strategic move. The betrayal wasn't just something they feared, she said, a horrifying realization dawning on her. It was already happening. The silent partner they were afraid of wasn't a secret investor. It was someone on this side of the deal. Someone who was feeding them misinformation about us, while also manipulating our own data to make it look like they were the aggressors. Her eyes locked onto Marcus Vance. Someone who needed to discredit me before I found the proof. She turned to the main screen, her fingers flying across her tablet. I was looking at their language, but I should have been looking at ours too. At the internal logs. She brought up a series of data packets, internal communications logs that tracked revisions to their negotiation proposals. The original proposals sent to Kaido were fair. But look here. She pointed to a timestamp. Mere seconds before they were sent, they were altered. Minor changes in financial phrasing, a single clause shifted here and there. To our side, they looked like standard revisions. But translated into the metaphorical dialect Kaido was using, these small changes turned our offers into threats. She traced the digital signature of the user who made those last-second alterations. The room held its breath. The name that flashed on the screen was Marcus Vance. The final piece clicked. You were the shadow, Marcus, Elara said, her voice ringing with certainty. You were eating the root from the inside. You were sabotaging the deal to trigger a stock collapse, so your real partners could buy out Thorn Industries for pennies on the dollar. And you leaked that story about me to get me out of the way before I found this. Marcus's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury and panic. He was exposed, ruined, defeated not by a corporate rival, but by the waitress he had dismissed and tried to destroy. The game was over. The aftermath was decisive. Security escorted a silent, defeated Marcus Vance from the building. The board, stunned and humbled, gave Julian and Elara their unanimous, unequivocal support. Armed with the proof of Marcus's treachery, Julian was able to re-establish trust with Kaido. The merger was not only saved, it was strengthened, built now on a foundation of transparency and mutual respect. Elara was no longer a scandal or a mystery. She was a hero. The story of the waitress who saved Thorn Industries became a legend, but this time, the narrative was one of genius, integrity, and perception. Julian offered her a permanent position as the head of a newly created global communications strategy division, a role that utilized her unique talents to their fullest. She accepted. Her life had been irrevocably transformed, not just by the money or the title, but by the discovery of her own worth. Weeks later, Elara stood with Julian on the balcony of his penthouse. The city glittered below them, a universe of infinite possibilities. The chill of the evening air was kept at bay by the warmth of their proximity. The professional victory was complete, but a quiet, personal question remained in the space between them. You saved my company, Julian said, his voice filled with a gratitude that went far beyond business. You saved my father's legacy. Elara looked at him, at the man who was no longer the cold, intimidating Ice King, but someone who saw her, truly saw her, when no one else had. You saw me, she corrected him gently. When I was invisible to everyone, including myself. You gave me a chance to be more than what I was. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. It was a gesture that was both a comfort and a promise. What I saw, he said, his gaze intense and sincere, was the most valuable person I have ever met. You taught me that the greatest assets aren't listed on the stock exchange. They're hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to bother to look. The distance between them vanished, the city lights blurring into a soft glow behind them. His lips met hers, a kiss that was not one of passion, but of profound recognition and homecoming. It was the closing of one chapter and the beautiful, brilliant beginning of another. So, let me ask you again, who are the invisible people in your world? The barista who remembers your order, the janitor who works while you sleep, the quiet colleague in the corner cubicle. What hidden talents, what unspoken knowledge, what profound worth are you overlooking every single day? The world is full of Elaras, waiting for one person to ask the right question. Perhaps it's time we all started looking a little closer. Share this story if you believe in the power of hidden potential, and tell us in the comments about a time someone saw the value in you when no one else did.